Here are the steps to naming ionic compounds. First step is to draw a dotted line between the cation and anion so it separates the compound and you know that you're naming the right part. Then you're going to write the cation name, and if it's a transition metal, it's going to have a Roman numeral beside it. Then finally, you will write the ion name with the correct suffix. You might be wondering how to pick the correct suffix. So when you have an anion, you're going to have multiple different types of anions. So the first type is just a main group element. So any element that's in the main groups are in the anion section of the periodic table. So with those elements, you're going to use this list. So like for nitrogen, it would be nitride. For oxygen, it would be oxide. For fluorine, you would change it to fluoride, and so on and so forth. So use this list and write it down so you can use it in the future. Then you'll have polyatomic ions, which will be the exact same name as they are on your news you can use. So they're all right here on your news you can use. Okay, so let's start out with a simpler one. So this compound, NaCl, has two different parts. So you draw the line between the cation and the anion. So this separates it so that we know that we're going to have two different parts. Then the cation in this case is sodium, Na. And then the anion is chlorine. And so we'll look on our list here and see that chlorine is changed to chloride. And we're done. So this compound's name is sodium chloride. All right, for our next example, we're going to use FeO. So the first step is that we're going to draw the dotted line between the cation, Fe, and the anion, oxygen. Then we're going to have two spots. So now, because we know that iron is a transition metal, we have to figure out the charge so we can write a Roman numeral. So oxygen we know has a -2 charge, and therefore because there's only one iron, we know that it has a +2 charge. So when we write the cation name, it will be iron 2 because it has a +2 charge. Then we write the anion. So oxygen is a main group element, so we're going to look on our little list. And then so oxygen will be changed to oxide. And that's it. So this compound's name, FeO, is iron 2 oxide. For our next example, we're going to use CuNO3 So just like always, we're going to start with the dotted line right through the middle so we can separate the cation and the anion. So in this case, we have another transition metal. So copper is a transition metal, so we have to figure out its charge in order to write the name. So this, we can kind of reverse Sox method it and kind of put these numbers back up top, kind of like we did in the last video, but just in reverse. So then this is a 1 here because you simplified it out. And then this would be a -1 up here because it's a nitrate. And then copper would have a +2 charge. Now, nitrate, we know from our news you can use, has a -1 charge. So that means that this is correct, and we can take that at face value. So that means that our cation is copper, and then Roman numeral 2. And remember, with our anion being a polyatomic, we look on the news you can use, and we see that nitrate NO3 is right there. So it's just copper 2 nitrate. For our last example, we're going to use TiSO4 So the first step is to separate the cation and anion by drawing a dotted line. So in this case, we have titanium and sulfate, but we have to figure out the charge of titanium because it's a transition metal. So again, we're going to do the reverse Sox method and kind of bring these numbers up. So this would be a -1, and that would be a +2. Now, we have to go and make sure that sulfate Let me get the glare off. There it is. So sulfate, SO4, needs to have a -2 charge. It does not have a -2 charge here. So we have to multiply this and this by 2 to get our correct charge. So this titanium atom has a +4 charge, not a +2 charge. So we're going to write titanium, parentheses, and then Roman numeral 4. Then, since we have a polyatomic, we're going to look back on our news you can use and see that this name for the SO4 ion is sulfate. So then we just write sulfate. And that is the name of this compound, titanium 4 sulfate.